Good morning. If I yawn, which I'm probably about to do, I'm not bored, nor am I tired of you, nor am I even tired. I am experiencing air hunger. And so I yawn and it never fully completes, which means it just keeps happening and happening on an endless cycle while I try to take a deep breath. Go me. Um, but let me see if I can do it one time and if it'll cover it. But now it's not going to do it until I'm in the middle of a very powerful sentence. I am glad to be back with you all. Last week I was in Dallas. Ingrid and I went with a couple of friends of ours, Liz, Aaron, and their two children. The primary purpose of the trip was for my wife to go to a World Cup game. I am so tired of soccer. Jesus. But she got to go. She had a jersey for every day of the week. Sunday's game was the Netherlands versus Japan. My body would not let me do the 6-hour drive, so we flew in. Praise be. Praise be. 1.5 hours. Not even that. I couldn't even read a whole comic. It was beautiful. And she got to do the Orange Walk, which tens of thousands of Netherlands fans, all dressed in orange, walked about 3/4 miles to the stadium, doing their chants and all of that before the game. And she was able to experience the Netherlands and Japan. I have seen so much soccer in the last week, against or in my will, I don't know. But she enjoyed it, and we spent a few days watching soccer in the Airbnb. They had so many TVs for us. It was great. There are 4 games a day. And going to comic book stores. So I got to go to 3 comic book stores and find lovely things, eat great food and rest, and sleep and sit out and get harassed by ravens who ate half my muffin every day and wouldn't accept little pieces. I had to throw like a half before they would kind of go away, but I don't know. Maybe they'll start bringing me gifts now that I'm home. Maybe they followed me, but they ate half of my little cherry bobo every morning. But it was lovely, and it was a good time. And thank you to our streaming services who continue to keep us cloaked in soccer games. Yay us. As we spent time away, I also had the privilege to begin coordinating the logistics for our dear Anthony's funeral and celebration of life. One thing that was interesting to me, though, is I noted how many times people reached out with a text or question and gave a very long apology for interrupting me or interrupting my time or telling me what I should. You should be resting. Well, I am. I can chew gum and walk at the same time. Or how's your body? You should not be answering the phone. Well, you're right, but here we are. And I just want to make it clear that nothing would have kept me from doing the work that I am honored and privileged to do and the timing that we had. What I did not do was log into that other job. That laptop could have lived or died on my desk at home. I did not check Teams. I did not check emails. I only responded to funny memes or cute messages if people sent it to me via text. I was supposed to meet up with 2 coworkers, and I am a 2-message back and forth person. If we can't figure out logistics in 2 messages, I ain't gonna make it. I don't have the capacity to go back and forth with you on your calendar, so I did not see them either. But what I did do was see my energy focused on things that were deep and narrow. That is a new saying in my home. It is what we say when we are encouraging each other not to get distracted by all the things that could be doing all of those outside things, all the things that come up, or all the places that we see need someone and we think it to be us. It helps us stay focused on the areas that explicitly need our time, treasure, and talents. It does not mean that those other things are not important, We've just realized that there will always be important things. There will always be things that need our attention, but for me, I can't be all things to all people. I leave that to Jesus. I can't do it if I want to show up well and not burn out. I cannot do it if I want to honor myself. We cannot do it if we want to honor ourselves. Those are big words, aren't they? Honor ourselves. This month, I've been thinking about those words a lot. June is a time where we honor two specific aspects of my identity. It is Pride Month, and this past Friday was Juneteenth. Both ask us to remember and honor populations of people that have been marginalized and historically excluded. Pride Month traces its origins to the Stonewall Uprising, when LGBTQ plus people weary of harassment, criminalization, and exclusion resisted yet another police raid and sparked a movement that continues today. Pride is often celebrated with parades and rainbow flags and wings and costumes, but at its heart, pride is a memorial. It remembers the courage of people who insisted that they were worthy of dignity. It honors those who died, never being able to live in the fullness of their truth. It honors that we don't have many queer elders. It remembers those who sought safety and belonging and dignity in a world that denied them and still denies us, all three. Juneteenth commemorates June 19th, 1865, the day enslaved people in Galveston, Texas learned of their freedom more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation had been issued. It is celebrated, but it also is a remembrance too. It reminds us that freedom delayed is still an injustice. It remembers the resilience, faith, and perseverance of Black communities who continued to hope and endure when liberation seemed distant and was yet hidden. Both of these observances ask us to tell the truth about ourselves and history. Both invite us to remember people who refused to disappear. Both call us to honor the weary work of those who kept going when giving up would have been easier. And perhaps that's why I've been thinking about how I honor myself and how we can honor ourselves this month. Because honoring ourselves is not an arrogance. It's recognizing that we too are beloved creations of God. It's understanding that our lives, our bodies, our stories, our callings, our purpose matter enough to be tended and cared for. It's refusing to treat ourselves as expendable in service to every demand, every expectation, and every new crisis that comes our way in the time of crisis. That is no longer unprecedented. I haven't said that word in a while. It's all precedented at this point. When we do that, when we respond to every demand, even those beyond what we deem is deep and narrow, the question often becomes, how do we continue the work we are called to do without treating ourselves as though we do not matter? I feel that in his own way, that's what Jeremiah is trying to make sense of here in chapter 20. He was not called to an easy task, and like many of the prophets, he was hesitant and doubtful when God first called him. Back in chapter 1, Jeremiah, like many of us, tried to explain to God why he was not the right person for that job. He was young. He did not feel prepared. He was certain that there had to be someone better suited. God and their usual selves ignored all of that, and what Jeremiah eventually learned is that being called by God does not protect a person. In fact, it sometimes places them directly in danger's path. By the time we reach chapter 20, Jeremiah had spent years delivering messages that nobody wanted to hear. He had warned leaders about injustice. He had challenged people who were convinced that everything was fine. He had spoken difficult truths in very public places, and the result was not appreciation, it was ridicule. Just before the verses we read today, as Eldon discussed, Jeremiah had been beaten and placed in the stocks by Pashur the priest, who was a false prophet whose name would become known as Panic Everywhere. That King James Version, I think you read, it was Terror Everywhere. Jeremiah had been publicly humiliated. He had become a spectacle. This prayer that he wrote, or this crying out to God that he wrote, wasn't written from a place of comfort. He was not on the sectional relaxing, quietly reflecting on his sweet summer life. He was speaking from a place of immense pain. When he says, "O Lord, you have enticed me, and I was enticed," it sounds like praise, like wooing. "Ooh, girl, you done got me going, and I am going." No, he didn't mean it like that. What Jeremiah did is he's looking at his circumstances and saying, "God, this ain't what I signed up for. You tricked me, you got me, and here I am, and this was not the deal." Most of us have had moments like that where we looked at our lives and wondered how we ended up carrying this. Running around with an empty tank full of fumes and faith. Eventually, the question emerges, is any of this making a difference? I think that question lives underneath much of what we remember this month. The people whose courage we honor during Pride did not wake up one morning and find acceptance on the other side of the rainbow flag. They faced rejection, violence, discrimination. The movement that grew out of Stonewall was not born because their life had been great and easy. They were in hiding. The bars and things that they went to, they had to speak coded languages. It was born because they grew tired of being treated less than human. Those we remember on Juneteenth knew something similar. Enslaved people resisted in countless ways for generations. They held on to hope when the system insisted constitutionally that they had none. Even after emancipation was declared, could you imagine remaining in bondage? Because those in power had no interest in giving up what they stood to lose, free labor. Freedom came, but it came through struggle, endurance, and a determination to believe in liberation. Neither story is one of people who did not grow weary. Both are stories of people who very much did, and that's where we meet Jeremiah. Jeremiah is tired. He is tired of being mocked. He is tired of being opposed. Jeremiah, our weeping prophet, our prophet who put on the shackles of the ox. He's tired of carrying a message that nobody wants to receive. The thing I find remarkable is that he says it all out loud. Too often we assume that faithful people never reach that point. We bypass with "you're so resilient," not realizing that that resilience is erosive over time when not met with rest. We imagine that if our faith is just strong enough, we will never feel exhausted. That is a lie. Here is one of God's prophets admitting that he wants to walk away. He says, if I even think about just not saying his name, not speaking it anymore, then within me there's something like a burning fire shut up in my bones. He wanted to quit. He thought about it. If you read on, I didn't think we could handle it today, them next few verses. You can read them in your private time. But he wishes his mother never birthed him, that he would have perished in the womb. That's a hard day. When you just go all the way back, think about whatever big age you might be at right now. And think about saying, you know what? I just wish there was never a beginning. You have went all the way back. Think how tired you have to be. Jeremiah wants to be done. He want to get up out of there. And it has nothing to do with his faith. It has nothing to do with his belief system. It has nothing to do with the measure with which he cares. He wants to quit because it's gotten too heavy. And that's a different thing altogether. There is an exhaustion that comes from trying to do what is right for a very long time. Jeremiah is not weary because he had been reckless. He is weary because he's been faithful in an area where he has been isolated and he cannot see fruit. There is a weariness that comes from carrying responsibility, from continued care, from continuing to show up. It is the weariness of well-doing. Jeremiah is not the only person in Scripture who knew this feeling. The Bible would have been much shorter if he were. That weariness is universal when you have labored in the things of God. And by that, I don't just mean ministry. I mean those things that you are called to for the seasons that you enter them. The apostles and the believers, still carrying a message and love of full of purpose, grew tired too. When we get over into the Greek Bible or the New Testament, it returns to this theme again and again because the early church knew that faithfulness could be exhausting. In Galatians 6 and 9, Paul writes, "Let us not grow weary in doing what is right, for we will reap at harvest time if we do not give up." He doesn't tell that church that they'll not get tired. He encourages them not to surrender to the weariness. There's an acknowledgement that doing what is right often requires our endurance. The harvest may come, but it does not always arrive on our preferred timeline. It's like my grandmother would say, he may not come when you want him to, but he is always right on time. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul writes, "Therefore, since it is by God's mercy that we are engaged in this ministry, we do not lose heart." A few verses later, he describes being afflicted, perplexed, persecuted, and struck down. That's a lot for a person. This is not the language of someone who has had an easy journey. Paul understands what it feels like to continue showing up with disappointment, opposition, and suffering. Yet he refuses to let those experiences define the work he has been entrusted to do. Later in that same letter, in chapter 12, Paul shares words that many of us know by heart. God tells him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness." That one I quote often. Living with chronic illness has forced me to reconsider what strength actually means. There are days when I would love to offer more of my confidence and competence, more of my energy, more of my productivity. Yet Paul reminds us that God's power is not dependent upon our ability to do everything. God's grace does not disappear when our capacity is diminished. God's grace does not disappear when our capacity is diminished. Sometimes we discover God's presence most clearly when we are no longer able to rely solely on ourselves and our own strength. The writer of Hebrews offers these words in chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. After describing the great cloud of witnesses, the text tells us to run with perseverance the race set before us and keep our eyes on Jesus. Then comes this instruction: consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, so that you may not grow weary or lose heart. That, to me, is so powerful alongside Jeremiah. Jeremiah was mocked. Jesus was mocked. Jeremiah faced opposition for speaking truth. Jesus faced opposition for embodying truth. Jeremiah wanted to quit. In Gethsemane, Jesus prayed with such anguish that sweat fell like drops of blood. Scripture does not hide the cost of faithfulness from us. What it shows us instead, that your weariness is not a failure. The struggle is not evidence that we have lost our way. Sometimes it is evidence that we have been walking the right road for a long time and we are tired. So now what? I return to the phrase deep and narrow. The older I get, the more I realize that much of my exhaustion comes from trying to carry things that were never mine to carry. There's always another problem that needs solving. There's always another crisis demanding attention. There's always another reason to give more of ourselves than we actually have available. Somewhere along the way, many of us learned that faithfulness meant saying yes to everything. The scriptures remind us that it does not. Jeremiah was not called to save Judah. He was called to tell the truth. Whether people listened was not his ultimate responsibility. Paul was not responsible for the response of every church he planted. He was responsible for proclaiming the gospel that was entrusted to him. Even Jesus understood the limits and boundaries of his earthly ministry. Crowds followed him wherever he went, yet he still withdrew to private places to rest and pray. There were always people who needed healing, more people who wanted attention, more people asking something, yet he remained focused on the work God had given him to do. Like Jeremiah, some of you may be weary today too. Carrying burdens that have become heavy, caring for loved ones, grieving, navigating change. If that is you, I want you to hear what these scriptures are telling us. They are not telling us that God only works through people who have endless amounts of energy and unlimited capacity. What they show is that faithful people get tired. But the good news is that God remains present when we do. That's what carried Jeremiah through humiliation and rejection. That's what sustained Paul through hardship and uncertainty. That is what strengthened Jesus to continue walking toward Jerusalem when every step was drawing him closer to the cross. This month, we remember people who grew weary and kept going. Their stories remind us that weariness and faithfulness often travel together. So perhaps the final question before us this morning is not whether we are tired. Perhaps the question is whether we're spending ourselves on the things God has actually called us to do. Whether we are tending to what is deep and narrow. Whether we are honoring the bodies, minds, and spirits God has entrusted to our care, and first and foremost, that is always the sanctuary of your own self. Whether we are trusting God enough to leave some stuff in God's capable hands. Weariness is not a weakness, it's a signal. A flashing red light reminding us that we cannot carry everything. We were never meant to. That's why we only got two hands. If you were supposed to carry everything, you'd have been an octopus, and you're not. I'm sad about that, but it's the truth. We were never meant to be overburdened. We can only carry our parts. And thanks be to God that we don't even have to carry that alone. Amen. Amen.